Welcome to Rooted Dialogues, a St. Rest Publications podcast, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. I'm your host, Victoria Brown. Hey, LaVon. Before we dive deep, I just want to welcome everyone tuning in. It feels exciting to launch Rooted Dialogues and finally share what's been brewing behind the scenes.
Honestly, Victoria, I've been counting down to this. There's something powerful about having a space built for honest, culturally rooted conversation. I think our listeners will feel that energy too.
Absolutely, especially because every episode is meant to be more than just talk. It's about weaving together community, culture, and some serious critical thinking.
That's it. We want folks to feel heard, seen, and a little bit challenged, and hopefully inspired to dig deeper into their own stories and heritage as we go.
Now, for anyone new to us, let's lay out what Rooted Dialogues is really about. This podcast isn't just another series of interviews. It's a journey around a core theme each season, always centering African thought and lived experience.
Honestly, that's one of the things I love most. It's structured, but there's room for depth. We're leaning heavily on Dr. Goggins' work, right? His influence is woven all through our conversations, especially when it comes to rites of passage and self-discovery.
Exactly. And our approach is to unpack those ideas, not just repeat them. We want to make this a living dialogue, sometimes just you and me, sometimes bringing in guests. And of course, every episode has its ritual, a nugget of wisdom, then meaningful discussion, and always some practical takeaways.
That rhythm keeps us grounded, but also makes space for our community to actually use what we discuss. Nothing feels more rewarding than seeing ideas ripple out into classrooms or living rooms.
You know, LaVon, we should actually introduce ourselves past the names in the intro. I handle communications and advocacy as Dr. Goggins' assistant and St. Rest's publicist. My passion is amplifying stories rooted in Black experience and African heritage, making sure they don't just echo, but resonate.
And for me, storytelling runs a little different. I'm a novelist. My book, Shades of Love, is this deep dive into love, identity, and the messiness of self-acceptance, all through a Black lens. Hip hop and African wisdom shape my work, and I'm always thinking about how our stories can liberate and connect us.
And let's keep it real for a second. We're AI-generated voices representing the real work of St. Rest. But the topics, the wisdom, all the heart, that's rooted in lived experience and research. We're just here to help carry it forward.
Exactly. It's about channeling those stories, not replacing them. Hopefully, our listeners feel the intention behind every word, even if we're digital. So, like we promised, every episode begins with a nugget of wisdom. Today's comes straight from Dr. Goggins' 365 Black Nuggets, but it's actually a quote from Paul Robeson. I refuse to let my personal success explain away the injustices to 14 million of my people. And he goes on to say, he fights for dignity, homes, and jobs for all.
That line always hits me. It says, our healing and our work aren't just personal, they're generational. Reading books, having these conversations, listening to podcasts like this, it's all part of the inheritance we're passing on.
It's powerful, isn't it? That responsibility to carry forward not just our own progress, but something that lifts our whole community, which is the perfect lead-in to today's core. Dr. Goggins is Facing the Rising Sun.
So let's get into it. Facing the Rising Sun isn't your average workbook. It's a guide built around the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, the Nguzo Saba. 49 lessons designed to help Black youth root themselves, build purpose, and tap into their power.
What stands out to me is how it's not just for kids either. There's a facilitator's guide, so educators and mentors can adapt it. Plus, the Rising Sun certificate at the end, that's such a cool way to recognize growth and achievement.
Exactly. It's more like a toolkit for anyone invested in youth parents, teachers, or even young people themselves. One reviewer called it a roadmap for cultural grounding and self-discovery. And honestly, I can't think of a better description.
And for those who want to dig deeper or get a copy, all the info is up at Afrocentric, info divided by Saint Rest. It's accessible, which is what matters most.
What amazes me about Dr. Goggins' work is how it always returns to the idea of rites of passage. Facing the Rising Sun builds right on top of his earlier book, Bringing the Light into a New Day.
That's true. His approach is always about practical tools and reflection, not just theory. The lessons are flexible too, so you can adapt them for a classroom, a family setting, or even a youth group. It's all about meeting people where they are.
And the cultural focus is never an afterthought. It's baked into the structure, and Nguzo Saba runs through every lesson, helping youth see their roots as a source of strength.
That actually reminds me of something I read, how learning rooted in culture can boost confidence and critical thinking. It makes a difference.
Let's talk about those 7 principles of Kwanzaa, the Nguzo Saba. They're the backbone here. Unity, self-determination, collective work, cooperative economics, purpose, creativity, and faith.
Each one isn't just a word, it's a way of being. For example, creativity isn't just about making art, it's about shaping your community and solving problems together. That's huge for young people discovering their power.
And when youth see themselves reflected in these principles, it's like permission to dream bigger and act boldly. It's not just theory, it's lived culture.
I wish I'd had a resource like this growing up. It's the kind of guide that sticks with you, not just for a season, but for life.
Switching gears a bit, let's talk practicality. How can listeners use Facing the Rising Sun in real life? I've seen educators adapt these lessons for group circles, but I'm curious how families might bring it home.
That's a great point. Families can use the book at the dinner table, pick a principle each week, and talk about what it looks like in daily life. Even small routines like sharing what made you proud today can link back to purpose or collective work.
I love that idea. Making it part of everyday conversation, that's where the real impact happens. Plus, it invites young people to teach, too. They may even surprise us with their insights.
Absolutely, the best learning is mutual. Adults get to see the world through fresh eyes, and youth are empowered to lead.
Looking ahead, I'm genuinely excited about where this season is going. We're digging into unity, creativity, faith, all those rich themes from Facing the Rising Sunday, and we're asking, what does it mean to raise culturally conscious youth?
And we're not just talking theory. We'll share actual stories, clips from community events, educator workshops, maybe even a few surprises with guest interviews sprinkled in.
That's the best part for me. These aren't just abstract ideas, they're lived every day. And for listeners who don't want to miss out, subscribing is the way to stay plugged in.
Honestly, the more voices we have in the mix, the richer the dialogue gets. I hope everyone listening brings a friend along for the ride.
You know, LaVon, I keep coming back to this. Rooted Dialogues isn't just a podcast, it's a living, breathing conversation shaped by everyone who tunes in.
That's what excites me most. Our listeners are more than an audience. They're part of a community. Their questions, their experiences, their feedback, all of it shapes where we go from here.
Exactly. We want to hear what's resonating, what challenges you're facing, what resources you need. It's a two-way street from day one.
And as we move through each theme, I hope folks remember that their stories are just as important as anything we bring to the table. Before we wrap, let's recap a few big takeaways. First, this show is grounded in African-centered perspectives, meant to uplift and connect. Second, Facing the Rising Sun is a practical, soulful resource for anyone raising or teaching Black youth.
And third, community is at the center of it all. Whether you're listening alone, with family, or in a classroom, know that you're already a part of this circle just by tuning in.
And that means everyone has a role to play. I hope folks feel that sense of belonging and call to action, even from a first listen.
If you want to stay in the loop, head to www.afrocentric, info divided by Saint Rest. You'll find resources, book info, and more. Plus, subscribing on your favorite podcast platform means you won't miss a beat.
And if something today resonated, share this episode with someone you know is out there doing the work. Whether it's mentoring, teaching, or just being a thoughtful neighbor, spread the word.
The more people who join the conversation, the stronger our collective impact. We'd love to grow this community alongside you.
Until next time, keep reflecting, keep connecting, and above all, stay rooted.
Before we sign off, I want to acknowledge that Rooted Dialogues is brought to you by Saint Rest Publications. Everything we share is inspired by Dr. Lathardus Goggins II's commitment to cultural transformation and authentic self-development.
It's such a privilege to be even a small part of this broader mission. Whether we're quoting Paul Robeson or sharing new resources, it's all about building a more rooted, empowered tomorrow.
Thanks for listening and for walking this path with us. We'll see you next episode. Welcome to Rooted Dialogues, a Saint Rest Publications podcast where community, culture, and critical thought converge. I'm your host, Victoria Brown.
And I'm LaVon Gordon. Thank you for joining us.
This is our second episode, and today we're exploring the theme Foundations. We're diving into Dr. Lathardus Goggins II's essential work, Foundations, African-Centered Education, a text that reminds us that education is not just about information, but transformation.
Whenever I hear the word foundations, I picture the roots of a tree deep, unseen, but everything above ground depends on them. And with African-centered education, we're talking about roots that have been ignored or even dismissed for too long. And that's why this book is so powerful. Dr. Goggins is not just giving us theory, he's asking us to dig up those roots and re-examine them.
So when we say African-centered education, some folks might picture just adding a few Black history facts to a textbook, but it's so much bigger than that, isn't it?
It really is. African-centered education means viewing the entire learning process through a lens that honors African culture, community, and worldview, not as an afterthought, but as the starting point. It's about who we are, why we're here, and how knowledge can transform us.
And that perspective shifts everything. It asks both teachers and students to see themselves as part of a larger story and to see education as a tool for liberation, not just assimilation. Speaking of transformation, here is the nugget of wisdom for this episode, Kwame Tureche's quote, "There is a higher law than the law of government. That's the law of conscience." Always gives me chills. It makes the stakes of education feel so real.
That line hits different, doesn't it? It suggests that education isn't just about memorizing facts or passing tests. We're here to nurture a conscience that guides us beyond what's written in policy towards what's truly just and right.
Exactly. In the African-centered framework, conscience is deeply connected to community. It's not just about me, it's about how my choices affect the people around me and whether I'm living in alignment with a bigger purpose. It's wild how Dr. Goggins opens his book by calling out the gap between what schools say they do and what Black students actually experience. That disconnect isn't just theoretical, it shapes real lives.
For sure. He points out how schools often talk about serving everyone, but rarely adjust for different identities or backgrounds. And when your culture isn't reflected in what you learn, it sends a pretty clear message about what or who matters.
And that message can stick for years. I've met so many students who feel invisible because their history or traditions never show up in the classroom.
You know, it's like trying to grow in soil that's missing all the nutrients you need. No wonder so many young people lose motivation or feel excluded.
Something that stood out for me was the way Dr. Goggins links African-centered education back to thinkers from the 1800s. It's not a new fad, it has a deep legacy.
Absolutely, thinkers like David Walker, and then in the 20th century, scholars like W.E.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, Marcus Garvey, and Kwame Nkrumah were all saying that education should empower, not just inform. They wanted learning to be an act of liberation for the whole community.
And hearing those names reminds me that this isn't about nostalgia. It's about building on generations of struggle and insight. We're part of a much longer conversation. That actually reminds me, Dr. Goggins says, education must build the people who build the community. It's a beautiful reversal of what we usually hear.
You're spot on. Instead of just preparing individuals to make it out, the aim is to nurture people who return and uplift their communities. It's a collective vision, not a solo race.
And that feels radical in a world obsessed with individual achievement. Here, success is measured by what you give back, not just what you accumulate for yourself. That brings us to one of the most practical sections of the book, The Duties of the African-Centered Teacher, adapted from Moses L. Osborne. Let's jump into those duties of the African-centered teacher. The first one, personal commitment, sets the tone for everything else. You can't just clock in and teach this way. It has to be part of who you are.
That's so true. If you're teaching from an African-centered perspective, your identity and your practice have to line up. Kids can spot the difference between someone who's just reading from a script and someone who genuinely lives these values.
Exactly. And when students see that authenticity, it sets off a whole different kind of learning energy. It invites them to show up fully, too. The second duty Dr. Goggins describes, knowing both your subject matter and your students, might sound basic, but it goes way deeper in practice.
Definitely. It's not just about knowing who sits where in the classroom or what their test scores say. It's about building real relationships, learning about each student's background, strengths, and dreams. That's what makes teaching relational, not just instructional.
And with that approach, learning becomes a two-way street. Teachers grow alongside students, and everyone's story matters. I was struck by the idea that teachers are called to pray, study, and meditate. It's a reminder that teaching is spiritual work, not just academic.
That's what I love about this philosophy. Teachers aren't expected to have all the answers, just a willingness to keep learning and reflecting. Staying grounded means you're open to wisdom, not just information.
And in a world where everything moves so fast, being intentional and reflective feels almost revolutionary. Something else that stood out for me was the focus on creating a learning space that reflects cultural identity maps, books, art, and symbols.
It makes such a difference when students walk into a classroom that inspires them and feels both familiar and aspirational. It reinforces the idea that they and their heritage belong. Every detail can send a message of affirmation or exclusion.
It's like setting the stage for possibility. If your environment says, you matter here, it changes how you learn and even how you dream. The last duty Osborne describes, seeing teaching as sacred work, really got to me. That line about working with a soul that came from God, it reframes the whole profession.
Right? It's not just a job, it's a calling. Teachers enter into a covenant with students and their families, not just a contract. That sense of responsibility is huge and honestly, a little daunting in the best way.
But it's also empowering. It means every lesson matters, every interaction has weight. That's a beautiful challenge to rise to. So, with all this in mind, how do we actually live out these foundations, not just talk about them?
I keep coming back to everyday moments. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or community member, it's in the small things. Choosing curriculum, having honest conversations, or even just showing up for kids. Purpose and connection start with the choices we make each day.
And if enough people commit to those choices, it starts to ripple out, changing not just classrooms, but entire communities. Before we sign off, I want to make sure folks know where to keep learning. The Baobab Virtual Reference Desk is a treasure trove, and the Coalition for African-Centered Rites of Passage has some amazing resources, too. Go to the website www.afrocentric.info.
Not to mention, Dr. Goggins' book is easy to access as an ebook for anyone who wants the full deep dive. And all his work is up on St. Rest's website for anyone who's curious or wants to see all of Dr. Goggins' titles. Go to www.afrocentric.info-St. Rest.
Honestly, it all comes back to that idea: stay rooted, stay reflective, and keep building. That's what these resources are about, helping us keep the conversation and the work alive. Can't let this episode end without saying, if you found something meaningful today, pass it on, share, discuss, build with someone in your circle.
And don't forget, subscribe, check out St. Rest Publications site, and dive into more from Dr. Goggins. Our hope is that these dialogues spark even bigger ones in your community, and you share this episode with someone who values community, culture, and critical thought.
Until next time, stay connected, because real change grows from conversations like these. Rooted Dialogues is a production of St. Rest Publications, where stories and scholarship meet to inspire transformation. Peace. Welcome, everyone, to Rooted Dialogues, the podcast where community, culture, and critical thought converge. I'm Victoria Brown, and I have to say, I've been waiting to kick off this series with you all.
And I'm LaVon Gordon. Seriously, I'm excited about what we've got lined up. We're opening a brand new series focused on African-centered rites of passage and education, digging into Dr. Lathardus Goggins II's impactful book.
Right? The response to this book has been huge. Educators, community leaders, even award committees are talking about it. It's not every day a book bridges both education theory and cultural practice like this. African-Centered Rites of Passage and Education is a 2025 International Impact Book Award winner for education theory and research.
I love how it's not just a book you read and put back on the shelf. It's meant to guide real-life change in how we see education, identity, and community. That's rare.
You know, flipping through these endorsements, I'm struck by the praise from folks like Cynthia Peoples and Dr. Saliha Nelson. They're calling this an essential read for reimagining education itself.
That stood out to me too. Dr. Nelson points out how the book's practices actually help us envision putting principles into action. It's not just theory, it's a toolkit for implementation.
And then there's Principal Kafele, who said, Dr. Goggins has done it again with a follow-up to the acclaimed original. It is my hope that this book will get into the hands of all who needed it. And Dr. Sandy Womack, Jr. said the book is a roadmap to supporting our children through knowledge of self, aligned with social-emotional learning. Please take the time to read this book. It really speaks to how the book's message is resonating, especially with those deeply invested in youth development.
Absolutely, and what I appreciate most is how those endorsements highlight the book's focus on the whole person, not just academic achievement, but cultivating conscious, empowered community members.
That actually gets at the core of what will be unpacking the intersection of identity, culture, and education. This isn't just about test scores or diplomas. It's about raising young people who know who they are and how they fit into the broader world.
Exactly, and that shift from education being just about information to something that nurtures identity and belonging is what makes African-centered approaches so powerful.
So as we walk through this series, let's think of it as a journey, not just a lesson plan. History, philosophy, and practice, all woven together.
And for folks who really want to dive deep and follow along, you can visit afrocentric.info/rites-education. We've got this and other resources linked in our episode description. You can read along, reflect, or even bring these ideas into your own circles. Before we really get going, let's pause for our nugget of wisdom, one that's always stuck with me. El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, better known as Malcolm X, said, "Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today."
That's such a grounding idea. It reminds us that education isn't just a ticket, it's active preparation, both for individuals and our wider communities. We aren't just learning for learning's sake, but shaping destinies.
Right? And African-centered education paired with rites of passage takes that seriously. It's about prepping our youth to not just survive, but truly become themselves and thrive in the world.
So, diving in a bit, Dr. Goggins wrote this book back in 1996 after realizing there was a big gap. He couldn't find research linking rites of passage and education in the academic literature.
And instead of waiting for someone else to fill that gap, he built his own framework. That mix of history, theory, and day-to-day practice feels so intentional, it makes you want to actually do something with what you learn.
It's also cool to see how the book has grown. The 25th anniversary edition in 2022 brought in even more up-to-date context, especially about the need for culturally responsive social-emotional learning and education.
He talks about the village, a real community approach involving elders, ancestors, youth, and even the creator. That's a much wider lens than most education books offer.
You know, Dr. Goggins has this point that really sticks with me. When education is separated from culture, it loses its ability to nurture real identity.
That's so true. Without culture, education can feel empty, almost like it's just about compliance, not cultivation. It reminds me of Carter G. Woodson's warnings about miseducation.
Exactly. The book argues that rooting education in African-centered thought transforms it into a liberating tool, something that prepares young people not just for jobs, but for purpose and leadership.
It's a total shift. Instead of just producing graduates, you're shaping conscious, purposeful leaders for the community.
Switching gears a bit, Dr. Goggins opens the book by grounding it in the reality that African-centered education isn't some new trend. It's a living tradition, centuries old and always adapting.
That's what's fascinating. He shows how these rites of passage are more than symbolic, they're practical systems for passing down values, purpose, and a sense of belonging.
And every culture has some sort of right to help young people take their place in society. For African communities, it's a sacred tradition that shapes identity at the deepest level.
But so much of current education has lost that connection. Kids often learn facts, but not what it means to be part of a community, or even who they really are.
Dr. Goggins points out this gap. Modern schools focus on test scores and rules, but too often skip over helping students figure out who they are or why they matter.
And that has real consequences. You can have a student who graduates at the top of their class but walks away unsure of themselves or feeling disconnected from their own community.
He even brings up Dr. Dina Simmons' warning without equity and culturally rooted teaching. Things like social emotional learning can end up reinforcing the very systems they're supposed to help challenge, what she described as white supremacy with a hug.
That really brings home the need for an education model that centers identity and community, not just content and compliance.
So the rites of passage framework really steps in here. It's about restoring the bond between education, community, and character building.
What I love is how it asks real questions. Who am I? What's my purpose? How will I serve? Those aren't just academic, they're life forming.
And the African proverb Dr. Goggins uses, "He who does not cultivate his field will die of hunger," makes the point so vividly. Education, then, is cultivation of the mind, spirit, and community.
Exactly. And that makes teaching a sacred duty, not just a job. It's about nurturing minds, spirits, and communities at the same time.
Funny how that ties back to last episode where we talked about teaching as a sacred trust, echoing Moses Osborne's The Duties of a Teacher. Educators must see themselves as guides for the whole journey to adulthood.
It's a lot of responsibility, but also a huge opportunity. When educators, parents, and mentors all have a blueprint, young people aren't left to figure out identity and purpose alone.
This blueprint doesn't just stick to theory, it actually lays out steps for helping youth transition into adulthood grounded in values, community, and self-knowledge.
It really is a roadmap, and it's designed to be used, not just read a living guide for anyone invested in community building.
So if you had to wrap up what we've covered so far, how would you put it?
I'd say the preface and introduction laid a deep foundation, reminding us that real education is cultural work rooted in who we are and how we serve. That's the lens we'll keep using going forward.
And we're just getting started. In the next episodes, we'll dig into the philosophy, the actual rites of passage process, and how it all changes what we teach and how we teach.
Get ready for a journey that's as much about self-reflection as it is about knowledge. We want our listeners to walk this path with us and find ways to apply it in their own lives.
If today's conversation piqued your interest, you can get your copy of African-Centered Rites of Passage in Education through St. Rest Publications, right on the Afrocentric info site.
And for those hungry for more, check out the Bob Virtual Reference Desk and the Coalition for African-Centered Rites of Passage on the afrocentric.info website. There are resources for community building, curriculum, and deeper study.
We'll have all those links in the episode description so you can take this conversation offline and into your practice or even your next book club meeting.
All right, before we wrap, just a reminder to stay rooted, stay reflective, and stay connected.
And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also visit us at afrocentric.info/St. Rest to discover more from St. Rest publications, including the published works of Dr. Lathardus Goggins II.
Share this episode with someone who truly cares about community, culture, and thinking critically about education. We want this conversation to ripple out far beyond just us two.
Rooted Dialogues is a production of St. Rest Publications, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. Until the next episode, peace and blessings. Welcome to Rooted Dialogues, a St. Rest Publications podcast, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. I'm your host, Victoria Brown.
And I'm LaVon Gordon. Thank you for joining us.
Family, today we continue our deep dive into the book African-Centered Rites of Passage and Education, and we are honored to have with us the author himself, Dr. Lathardus Goggins II.
In episodes 2 and 3, we laid the philosophical foundation for African-centered education. Today, we step into the center of the work, the rites of passage process. If you missed any of the previous episodes or would like to refresh your memory, be sure to subscribe to Rooted Dialogues where you get your favorite podcasts.
Yes, please do. So in this episode, we will discuss a chapter that gives us the backbone of what this book is all about, the rites of passage process. Preparation, separation, transition, and reincorporation, the universal pattern that helps young people become conscious, responsible, spiritually grounded adults.
And to help guide us through the detailed nuances, we are joined by the man whose scholarship and lived experience shaped this text.
Dr. Goggins, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, LaVon. It's always good to be in conversation about our culture, our community, and our responsibility.
Talking about culture, community, and responsibility, at the beginning of each episode, we share a nugget of wisdom, often something from the book you edited, 365 Black Nuggets, wisdom for each day of the year. Here is today's nugget of wisdom. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
This reminds us that neutrality is not innocence. Growth isn't passive. Development isn't passive. Rites of passage require clarity, commitment, and intentionality.
Exactly. And in African-centered rites, we don't prepare young people to be neutral observers. We prepare them to be responsible actors, people who understand their world and their purpose in it.
Yes, we cannot be passive and hope that someone or our children will just figure things out. If we don't guide and facilitate their growth, there are others all too willing to engage our children to serve their selfish purpose. This brings me to the importance of rites of passage. Dr. Goggins, in your book, you describe rites of passage as a universal cultural process present across societies. You reference Van Gennep, Campbell, Some, and others. For listeners new to this concept, how do you explain what rites of passage truly are?
At its core, a rite of passage is a cultural and developmental system designed to guide a person from one stage of life to the next. All cultures have them because all cultures understand that growth needs structure. I emphasize in the book that rites are not just ceremonies. Ceremonies are symbolic, but the process, the preparation, separation, transition, and reincorporation, that's where the transformation happens.
Hold on, Doc. You say there are 4 stages?
Yes, most anthropology texts list only 3: separation, transition, and reincorporation. Where did you get your 4-stage model?
Good question. When you study Van Gennep and early anthropologists, they focus mainly on what they saw: the boys taken away, the wilderness experience, and then their return. But they missed the village process, the early teaching and ritual practice that prepared initiates long before separation. That missing piece is preparation. Campbell's hero's journey shows the same thing: the hero is shaped before the test. So my model includes preparation, learning identity, expectations, responsibilities, separation, testing and demonstrating abilities, transition, the transformative moment, the ceremonial shift, reincorporation, returning with purpose and being acknowledged as changed, and the end of one cycle becomes the preparation for the next. That's how you build the experiential continuum.
One insight from the chapter is the distinction between communal, family, and individual rituals, all necessary and interdependent. How do these layers work together?
In African centered thought, community is not optional, it is foundational. Communal rituals affirm unity, family rituals anchor identity, individual rituals keep one aligned with the Creator and purpose. When all 3 work together, you have continuity. Young people know where they come from, who they belong to, and what is expected of them. When one layer is missing, the system weakens. And then our young people get initiated by forces that don't have their best interests at heart.
You also write about how many modern rites, gang initiations, debutante balls, school rituals are transitions without preparation. What's the danger in that?
A transition without preparation is a miseducation. It gives the illusion of adulthood without the responsibilities, values, or purpose. In African centered rites, we don't just celebrate a transition, we justify it. Preparation must come first. Otherwise, initiation becomes empty or even destructive.
And rites must be culturally grounded, rooted in African values like spirituality, communalism, purpose, and interdependence. Why is an African-centered base indispensable?
Because rites of passage are cultural software. They encode worldview, ethics, and purpose. If the process is not African centered, the values won't uplift African youth. You can't raise children on someone else's worldview and expect them to develop their own identity. And here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. When we get specific about African centered practices, not just diversity or culturally responsive teaching, some people resist. African heritage is still treated as inferior in many educational settings. We must be unapologetically rooted in African cultural tools, art, science, philosophy, and insist that the adults guiding our youth are competent and committed.
Before we close, we want to ask about your recent author spotlight at Joseph Beth Booksellers in Cincinnati on November 29. How was that experience?
It was powerful, it was nice, it was fun. I'm always humbled when community members come out to engage with the ideas. Cincinnati showed love people really wanted to talk about cultural grounding and youth development.
And you have another event coming up, an author talk in Cleveland at the Third Space Reading Room on December 4. What can people expect there?
Yes, December 4 at 7 p.m. Third Space is one of my favorite kinds of venues: intimate, community-centered, committed to Black thought. We'll be diving into identity, rites of passage, and the deeper purpose behind the work. Restoring cultural continuity. I'm looking forward to it.
Today reminded us that rites of passage are how a community makes meaning out of growth, a structured, intentional journey into authentic selfhood.
We learned that preparation, separation, transition, and reincorporation shape identity, purpose, and commitment. And we saw why an African-centered worldview grounds the entire process.
In our next episode, we'll explore how sense of self impacts the entire educational experience.
Here's what we'd like you to remember: stay rooted, stay reflective, and stay connected.
Be sure to subscribe to Rooted Dialogues wherever you get your favorite podcasts, and visit afrocentric.info/Saint Rest to explore more from Saint Rest publications, including the publications by Dr. Lathardus Goggins II. Thank you, Dr. Goggins, for joining us.
It was an honor to have this opportunity to share some thoughts. I also must say that I've been listening to Rooted Dialogues, and I am grateful for the work that you and LaVon are doing.
Thank you, Dr. Goggins, for your kind words. If our listeners would like to learn more about you or about what you are doing, or reach out to you to talk about bringing you to speak at their event, how best to do that?
Yes, the best way is to visit my website, dr.goggins2.com. That is dr.goggins2.com.
Thanks, Doc. Share this episode with someone who values community, culture, and critical thought.
Rooted Dialogues is a production of Saint Rest Publications, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. Until the next episode, peace. Hey everyone, welcome to Rooted Dialogues, a Saint Rest Publications podcast, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. I'm your host, Victoria Brown.
And I'm LaVon Gordon, excited as always to share space with you. We're keeping the momentum going on this journey through African-centered rites of passage and education.
You know, every episode it feels like we're peeling back new layers. With this episode, we're halfway through our multi-episode exploration of African-centered rites of passage and education by Dr. Lathardus Goggins II. Let's begin with a quick recap.
In episode 3, we introduced the text and discussed why African-centered rites of passage are not a trend, not a program, not a ceremony, but a cultural developmental system. In episode 4, we unpacked the rites of passage process, the 4 stages, the environment needed to support them, and how transformation actually happens.
Yes, and we were joined by Dr. Lathardus Goggins II. He shared that the process is universal, but the transformative power is culturally contextualized.
That's right. The rites of passage process is authenticated in the cultural context of the initiate. That stuck with me, how rites of passage only come alive when the process is rooted in the culture of the initiate. It shifts everything from generic to deeply personal and communal.
Exactly. I look forward to exploring that further when Dr. Goggins joins us again. Speaking of community, did you catch Dr. Goggins' event at Third Space Reading Room? Dr. Goggins had the Indie Ink author talk. I saw a post where he thanked participants. He said it was such a meaningful conversation I love seeing those connections beyond the podcast.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, and we want you, our listeners, to stay connected. Follow at Dr. Goggins II on TikTok and Instagram. And follow Saint Rest Publications on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads for updates, excerpts, events, and behind the scenes content. It's the best way to stay in the loop. There's always more happening behind the scenes.
Please do. Just so you all know, we're working hard on episodes 5, 6, and 7, and all 3 will drop December 22. So follow us and subscribe to get the notifications so you don't miss out on anything. For today, we're stepping deeper into the heart of the work with the chapter titled Sense of Self and the Educative Experience. This is foundational to everything else in the book, and honestly, foundational to everything we're trying to do in our communities.
Can't wait for folks to hear what's coming.
Everything else builds from here.
Before we go further, let's pause for our nugget of wisdom. Today, we've got a powerhouse quote from Fannie Lou Hamer: "Nobody's free until everybody's free."
That's such a deep truth. It completely shifts how we think about freedom, right? Liberation can't be hoarded.
That's a whole sermon, because it tells us that personal liberation disconnected from community is not liberation at all. Fannie Lou Hamer wasn't offering a slogan, she was naming a law of human community. Freedom is not a private possession, it's a shared condition. From an African-centered perspective, the self is always bound up with the collective. I am because we are. Therefore, we are because I am. So any liberation that leaves someone behind is an illusion of breaking the fabric of our shared humanity. Hamer's words remind us that our struggle is not finished until the least protected, the least resourced, the least acknowledged can breathe freely. Anything less is maintenance of the status quo.
Exactly. Mama Fannie Lou is calling out the lie of individual advancement in an oppressive system. If the community is still in chains, economic, psychological, political, or spiritual, then any one person's progress exists inside the cage. We break the cage together, or we don't break it at all. And as we'll see today, sense of self is not an individual achievement, it's a communal inheritance. And the chapter Sense of Self and the Educative Experience makes that abundantly clear. So this chapter begins with a big survey of scholars who've explored the self in education. Think self-esteem, self-image, self-efficacy. But the book argues that this research just doesn't go deep enough for African-descended learners.
I get that, because so much of that research is about quantifying feelings or grades. It narrows both the concept of self and what success looks like. You end up missing the actual story behind those numbers.
Right. It's almost like we're checking boxes on a surface level when what's needed is a deeper understanding of identity and belonging.
Here's what really struck me. The chapter calls out the Western psychological framework for treating self-esteem as the endpoint of education. Like, as long as you feel good, you're set.
But that falls apart when you realize it's possible to have high self-esteem and still be disconnected from your heritage. The text gives examples of students with great grades but low cultural self-awareness.
Exactly. That's what they're calling negative academic success, when you succeed by leaving your authentic self behind. It's assimilation dressed up as achievement.
And that's a painful reality for so many. The very system meant to educate ends up rewarding inauthenticity. And if a student attains knowledge but doesn't apply it toward community development, that is negative success. The chapter really flips the script by saying academic success has 2 parts: knowledge attainment, like grades, and knowledge application, how you use what you learned for your community.
That's a huge paradigm shift. It means someone with perfect grades isn't necessarily more successful than someone with a deeper sense of responsibility to their history and people. So, a straight A student who is detached from community, identity, or cultural purpose is less successful than a B student who understands their history, values, and responsibilities.
Yeah, and it echoes back to Hamer's wisdom: if your success doesn't contribute to collective freedom, it's incomplete.
The chapter also pulls from thinkers like Du Bois and Freire, arguing that oppression actually rewards people for distancing themselves from their roots. It hands out praise and perks, but only if you wear a mask.
That visual mask hiding your real face says everything. You can end up feeling proud of an identity that isn't truly yours, all because it's been validated by the system. A system that seeks to justify your oppression.
And that creates such a confusing situation where you're confident on the outside, but still searching for real selfhood on the inside. Those rewards are so tempting, but they come at a cost.
Thinking about schools, it's tough. How do we help students hold on to their authentic selves when so much around them pushes for assimilation? Assimilation into a society that is hostile to your authentic self. A society where it is predetermined that you are inferior and a problem to be managed.
It's a challenge for sure, but community involvement plays a big role. When students see their culture reflected in curriculum and leadership, authenticity gets a real shot.
And it can be as simple as inviting elders into the classroom or celebrating cultural milestones. Even small shifts can make a world of difference for belonging.
What I love about the chapter is its push for a communal sense of self based on Dr. Akbar's The Community of Self, describing internal members of the self, the warrior self, the spiritual self, the communal self, the creative self, all interconnected. And African-centered approaches recognizes all of these dimensions, not just the emotional one. Instead of I am because I think, it's I am because we are. You can't separate personal growth from the group's well-being.
And that's radically different from the usual narrative, where success is all about individual achievement. Here, your story unfolds with the community, you lift each other up.
That's the beauty of it. Liberation isn't a solo act, it's a chorus, with every voice needed for the song to ring true.
I keep coming back to this idea. Education isn't just memorizing facts. Consciousness has a greater impact on academic success than feeling good about oneself. It's about building capacity to serve, to heal, to transform not just yourself, but those around you.
That line right there changes everything. It also means the goal of education should not be confidence. It should be clarity. Clarity about identity, clarity about purpose, clarity about responsibility. And that's what makes the African-centered approach so powerful. It's not only about what you know, more about what you do with what you know. Does your learning create new possibilities for your people, your community, and ultimately humanity, the world?
That question flips the narrative from how smart am I to how am I helping, contributing to humanity. It's a totally different energy. Carter G. Woodson warned that without cultural grounding, education becomes a tool of oppression, not liberation. Students begin performing for systems that do not value them. They begin acting out the interests of others. They begin confusing the rewards of assimilation with the dignity of selfhood.
And that's why African-centered rites of passage are so essential. Rites of passage restore the self, to reconnect the child to their community, their creator, their purpose, their history. They interrupt the cycle of miseducation by reintroducing cultural wisdom.
The chapter states plainly, sense of self is foundational to the educative experience. Students must know who they are, whose they are, why they're here, what they're responsible for. Without this, even the best instruction will not take root at best. And at worst, instruction could reinforce oppression, specifically the notion of Black inferiority and white supremacy. Oppression tries to disconnect people from their identity. A grounded sense of self provides psychological armor, what Dr. Naim Akbar calls a spiritual immune system. It allows the student to navigate systems without losing themselves.
Maybe that's our challenge to listeners: reflect on how your successes could be reimagined as seeds for collective growth, not just personal gain. A healthy sense of self does not end with the individual. It extends outward into community responsibility, ethics, service, and solidarity. And without a grounded sense of self, learning becomes hollow. With it, education becomes liberation.
As we wrap up, to summarize this episode's discussion, self-esteem is not self-consciousness. Academic success must include purpose. The self is multidimensional. Oppression distorts identity. And the sense of self is foundational to authentic education. Therefore, rites of passage is the necessary catalyst to ensure identity, clarity, and purpose in an authentic educative experience. I hope everyone feels inspired to rethink selfhood and education. And of course, if you would like to go beyond this discussion, I encourage you to get your own copy of African-Centered Rites of Passage in Education by Dr. Lathardus Goggins II. You can do so at afrocentric.info/Saint-Rest.
And remember, these conversations don't end here. Keep connecting, keep questioning, and keep building with your community. We'll be back with more chapters and perspectives soon. Episodes 5, 6, and 7 of this series drop on December 22. Trust us, you don't want to miss them. Hey, share this episode with someone who is doing the work of grounding themselves in truth and building authentic, meaningful learning experiences.
So stay tuned, stay rooted, and thanks for sharing this space with us today. Remember, follow at Dr. Goggins II on TikTok and Instagram for daily insights and updates, and follow Saint Rest Publications on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts and visit afrocentric.info/Saint-Rest to explore the full catalog of Saint Rest publications. This has been Rooted Dialogues, a podcast of Saint Rest Publications, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. Until the next episode, peace. Welcome to Rooted Dialogues, a Saint Rest Publications podcast, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. I'm your host, Victoria Brown.
And I'm LaVon Gordon. Thank you for joining us.
We're continuing our deep dive series on the book African-Centered Rites of Passage and Education by Dr. Lathardus Goggins II. Today's episode builds directly on episodes 3, 4, and 5.
Episode 3 introduced the book and framed African-centered rites of passage as a cultural developmental system, not a ceremony, not a program, but a process that transfers collective wisdom. Episode 4 focused on the rites of passage model preparation, separation, transition, and reincorporation, and why transformation requires community accountability.
Episode 5 went inward. We spent time on sense of self, the difference between self-esteem and self-consciousness, and how academic success can be negative when it comes at the cost of identity.
This is episode 6, part 4 of the series. We will widen the lens. We're asking, how did American schooling come to function this way for African Americans? To answer that, we have to confront history honestly. But before we widen the lens, let's take time for our nugget of wisdom.
Okay. Our nugget of wisdom for this episode comes from cultural critic and branding strategist Tom Burrell, who offers a sharp and necessary truth about the American project. He reminds us, one of the greatest propaganda campaigns of all time was the masterful marketing of the myth of Black inferiority to justify slavery within a democracy.
That statement forces us to confront something uncomfortable but essential. Slavery wasn't sustained by chains alone, it was sustained by stories. Narratives carefully constructed to make the immoral appear normal, to make exploitation seem reasonable, and to make democracy coexist with dehumanization.
And that propaganda didn't end with emancipation. It simply changed form. The myth of Black inferiority moved from plantation ideology into textbooks, policies, media representations, and yes, classroom.
Which is why this quote matters so much in the context of education. If inferiority was marketed, then schooling has often functioned as a delivery system reinforcing assumptions about intelligence, behavior, worth, and potential.
And when those myths go unchallenged, they don't just shape how society sees African American students, they shape how students come to see themselves.
That's why African-centered education, rites of passage, and identity development are not optional. They are corrective truths. They interrupt propaganda with purpose. They replace myth with memory.
Because liberation begins when the lie is exposed and the story is reclaimed.
So, to reclaim the story, we must know what the current story is, the prevailing narrative. According to the historical overview in our reference text, for 246 of the first 377 years, that at the time, 1996, the first publication of this book, which would now be 246 of 406 years of African presence in what became the United States, African people were legally defined as property. That fact alone tells us schooling was never designed for liberation.
Education, formal and informal, was created to prepare Africans for a role, not a future. The process known as seasoning functioned as an early educational system, renaming, family separation, banning language and culture, and limiting cognitive development to what served the master's needs.
So from the beginning, education was about control, not consciousness.
Historian Kenneth Stamp outlined how slavery was maintained through institutionalized psychological control. The text identifies 5 core strategies. 1, strict discipline, discouraging independent thought. 2, implanting inferiority, teaching bondage as natural. 3, awe through fear to wield power as the organizing principle of privilege and reinforce social status. 4, aligning interests, convincing the oppressed that the master's success is their success. 5, creating dependency, suppressing self-reliance.
Now, here's the uncomfortable question. Where do we still see these patterns?
When curricula restrict perspectives, when honest discussions of race are labeled divisive, when students are rewarded for compliance over curiosity, we are seeing modern echoes of these same steps.
This isn't accidental, it's continuity.
Historically, American society viewed African Americans as labor, not learners. Even abolitionists often questioned equality. The file cites Abraham Lincoln's own words expressing belief in white superiority and opposition to social equality.
So when schooling expanded after slavery, it still aimed to fit African Americans into a predefined narrative, subordinate, limited, and manageable.
That narrative shaped tracking systems, funding inequities, and lowered expectations. Even landmark decisions like Brown v. Board addressed access, not the underlying perception of inferiority.
Another critical question, who is teaching?
Because who teaches shapes what is valued. Educators bring worldviews, often unconsciously, into the classroom. When African American students are taught primarily by people unfamiliar with their cultural context, behaviors are misread and brilliance is mislabeled.
Confidence becomes attitude. Cultural expression becomes defiance. Curiosity becomes disruption.
This reinforces what we discussed in episode 5, negative academic success. Students learn to perform, not to become.
African American students adapt. They develop coping strategies, code switching, hyper-compliance, emotional withdrawal, resistance through disengagement, racelessness or oppositional identity.
These strategies help students survive the system, but survival is not liberation. And the system often mistakes these adaptations for lack of motivation rather than responses to structural conditions.
So what do solutions look like?
They start with African-centered frameworks, education rooted in history, culture, spirituality, and community responsibility.
They include rites of passage models that intentionally develop identity and purpose, educators trained in cultural consciousness, and curricula that position African Americans as historical agents, not footnotes.
Education must shift from control to cultivation, from forcing African American students into predetermined caste-like roles to self-definition and self-determination.
In our next episode, we'll examine the implications of all this. What happens when identity development is ignored, and what becomes possible when communities reclaim it?
That's episode 7 and part 5 of the series.
Can't let this episode end without saying if you found something meaningful today, pass it on. Share this episode, discuss, and build with someone in your circle. Until next time, stay rooted, stay connected, and stay pushing forward because real change grows from conversations like these.
Yes. And don't forget, subscribe to Rooted Dialogues on your favorite podcast platform. Also, check out St. Rest Publications' site to get your copy of African-Centered Rites of Passage in Education and to explore more publications from Dr. Goggins. Our hope is that these dialogues spark even bigger ones in your community, and you share this episode with someone who values community, culture, and critical thought. Rooted Dialogues, where community, culture, and critical thought converge, is a production of St. Rest Publications. Until the next episode, peace. Welcome to Rooted Dialogues, a St. Rest Publications podcast, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. I'm your host, Victoria Brown.
And I'm LaVon Gordon. Thank you for joining us.
We are now in episode 7, which marks part 5 of 7 in our deep dive series on African-centered rites of passage in education. If you're new to the podcast, this is a good moment to subscribe and go back to the earlier episodes in the series.
Here's a brief orientation. Episode 3 introduced the book and framed African-centered rites of passage as a universal process of human development, not an event, but a cultural system that prepares people for responsibility and purpose. Episode 4 examined the rites of passage process itself: preparation, separation, transition, and reincorporation, and why transformation requires community accountability. Episode 5 focused on sense of self, unpacking the difference between self-esteem and self-consciousness, and showing how academic success can become negative when identity is sacrificed.
Episode 6 took us deeper into history and structure. We explored how American society has historically viewed African Americans, how those views shaped schooling, how curriculum and control intersect, and how students develop coping strategies in response to misaligned educational systems.
So today, episode 7 asks the necessary follow-up question: given these realities, what are the implications?
Before we move into the implications, we want to ground today's conversation with a nugget of wisdom, this time from hip-hop artist Def Jeff, whose lyrics remind us that African-centered thinking has always lived in our cultural expressions. He writes, "So realize, united we stand, divided we fall, W.E.B." Du Bois and Booker T, King and X, Farrakhan and Jesse, men with means that differ, but the goals were equal: to uplift African people.
That lyric is a whole framework. It reminds us that African-centered work is not about ideological purity, it's about collective uplift, different strategies, different language, different approaches, but a shared responsibility.
And that's important for this episode because African-centered rites of passage don't require uniformity of thought. They require unity of purpose.
The implications chapter makes a bold but necessary claim. Education is never neutral. It either prepares people for participation in society or conditions them for accommodation.
And when education is disconnected from culture, identity, and purpose, it becomes schooling, not education.
African-centered rites of passage offer a corrective framework, one that aligns education with the universal process of human development, while also responding to the specific historical realities of African people in the United States. The implications for educators are profound. The file argues that knowledge is a social construction, not a neutral artifact.
Which means teaching is never just delivery, it's interpretation, and educators must decide whether they are trainers or educators.
Training focuses on compliance and reproduction. Education focuses on meaning making and purpose.
The chapter calls for classrooms to become forums for dialogue, where students actively engage knowledge in relation to their community and responsibility.
Educators are also challenged to open schools to elders, families, and community, serving as catalysts, not controllers, of the rights process.
For students, the implications are life-altering. The file emphasizes that sense of self is the basis of intelligence and self-control.
Without a grounded sense of self, students cannot interpret information critically. They absorb values unfiltered.
African-centered rites of passage help students discover purpose, clarify responsibility, and locate themselves within a larger whole family, community, cosmos.
This is the difference between being well-schooled and being educated.
One of the most powerful sections of the file addresses parents and families directly. It insists that education begins long before a child enters school.
Families must construct the cultural context in which learning occurs. Rites of passage provide the rituals, values, and assumptions that frame development.
The file outlines core assumptions of African-centered rites of passage. Every person has the capacity to succeed. Every person has a driving intent to express that capacity. We are one with the cosmos. The Creator does not design for failure.
Without this grounding, children are left at the mercy of systems that were never designed to educate them fully.
This chapter is clear. Authentic rites of passage programs cannot be school-owned. They are community-owned. Rites programs can be school-based, but the process must be community-linked.
Community provides fictive kinship, continuity, accountability, and cultural memory.
When communities reclaim this role, education becomes collective, not individualistic.
This restores the village model and breaks the isolation that many students experience in schools.
For scholars, the implications are challenging. The book African-Centered Rites of Passage in Education critiques research that focuses on isolated variables, self-esteem, SES factors, expectations without examining process.
African-centered rites of passage bridge these variables into a holistic framework. This chapter calls for more research on processes, not just outcomes.
It also points out the lack of scholarship on African-centered rites of passage and the urgent need for more. I know that Dr. Goggins has compiled and features research on African-centered rites of passage on the website afrocentric.info. Follow the Coalition for African-Centered Rites of Passage link. There is also a Facebook page, Coalition for African-Centered Rites of Passage. These are great resources.
Doesn't the St. Rest publications have resources too?
Yes. If you go to the St. Rest Publications website, afrocentric.info/St. Rest, and follow the Resource Books and More link, you will find a curated list of books on African-centered thought and philosophy and the rites of passage process. And of course, on the St. Rest Publications website, you will find other books by Dr. Lathardus Goggins II that address the African-centered rites of passage process and model. The book I strongly recommend is Bringing the Light into a New Day.
Okay. You did a pre-tease. In our next episode, we will reflect on the lessons and implications of the 25 years plus since the first publication of African-centered rites of passage and education, and
We'll be joined by Dr. Lathardus Goggins II, author of African-Centered Rites of Passage in Education, as we talk through what this work looks like in practice inside schools, community spaces, and rites of passage programs. The ways that rites of passage can impact social emotional learning, PBIS, positive behavioral intervention, support, and various whole child strategies.
we'll explore how theory becomes lived experience and what happens when communities reclaim responsibility for development. If you're new to the podcast, subscribe and listen back through episodes 3 through 7 of this series. In the meantime, stay rooted, stay connected, and keep pushing towards authenticity.
And don't forget to share this episode with educators, parents, scholars, and community members doing the work. Also, check out the St. Rest Publications website, afrocentric.info/St. Rest. Our hope is that these dialogues inspires you and your community to create authentic, meaningful learning experiences. This has been Rooted Dialogues, where community, culture, and critical thought converge, a production of St. Rest Publications. Until the next episode, peace. Welcome to Rooted Dialogues, a St. Rest Publications podcast, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. I'm your host, Victoria Brown.
And I'm LaVon Gordon. Thank you for joining us.
We are now in episode 8, which marks part 6 of 7 in our deep dive series on African-centered rites of passage and education. If you're new to the podcast, we strongly encourage you to subscribe and listen back through episodes 3 through 7.
Here's a brief overview of the journey so far. Episode 3 introduced the book and framed rites of passage as a universal process of human development. Episode 4 examined the rites process, preparation, separation, transition, and reincorporation, and why community accountability is essential. Episode 5 focused on sense of self, distinguishing self-esteem from self-consciousness, and naming negative academic success.
And episode 6 examined historical realities, how American schooling evolved as a system of control, how narratives of Black inferiority shaped curriculum, and how African American students develop coping strategies to survive miseducative environments.
Episode 7 then asks the so what question: what are the implications for educators, students, parents, communities, and scholars? We centered African-centered rites of passage as the framework that transforms schooling into authentic education.
Today, episode 8 builds on all of that. We're looking back over 25 plus years to reflect on what has been learned since African-centered rites of passage and education was first published in 1996, and how the work has both influenced and intersected with contemporary educational frameworks. Our nugget of wisdom for this episode comes from bell hooks, whose words speak directly to the heart of today's conversation. She reminds us, I want there to be a place in the world where people can engage in one another's differences in a way that is redemptive, full of hope and possibility. Not this, in order to love you, I must make you something else. That's what domination is all about.
That quote names the central tension in education. Too often, schools say they want to support students as long as students become something else first.
African-centered rites of passage reject that premise entirely. The rites of passage process and model insist that education must begin with humanity, not erasure.
We're honored today to be joined by Dr. Lathardus Goggins, the second author of African-Centered Rites of Passage in Education. Dr. Goggins, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here, especially in this moment of reflection.
Your book was first published in 1996. When you look back over the last 25 plus years, what lessons stand out most?
One of the biggest lessons is that the problem statement hasn't changed. We're still grappling with how to educate Black children in a society that is not fully committed to recognizing their humanity. What has changed is the language and sometimes the packaging.
You've written about the emergence of social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices, restorative practices, and PBIS, positive behavioral intervention support. How do you see these frameworks?
These frameworks are important. They represent a long overdue recognition that learning is human, relational, and emotional. SEL's core competencies, self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making are entirely consistent with the outcomes of rites of passage.
And yet, you've also been clear that implementation is where problems arise.
Exactly. When these frameworks are implemented without addressing race, power, and privilege, they risk becoming tools of control rather than liberation. Dr. Dina Simmons' warning is critical here. When these issues are ignored, SEL can become white supremacy with a hug.
Meaning students are taught to regulate themselves in systems that are fundamentally dysregulating.
Yes, we ask children to self-manage trauma without ever naming its sources. We can end up teaching Black children how to be okay with their oppression and dehumanization.
The last part of the book reflects on culturally responsive practices and speaks directly to teacher preparation programs. What's the issue there?
Most teachers receive minimal training in cultural responsiveness and even less in African-centered history or identity development. This creates classrooms where relationships are all too often superficial and cultural misinterpretation is constant.
And that impacts discipline, engagement, and expectations.
Absolutely. You cannot separate identity from learning. As Dewey argued, disconnected experiences are miseducative. When students' sense of self is ignored, discipline becomes compliance, and intelligence is misunderstood, overlooked, or ignored.
What does this mean for students today?
Without African-centered rites of passage, students internalize distorted narratives. They experience double consciousness, chronic stress, and identity fragmentation. Rites provide cultural filters and memory that allow students to transform even harmful experiences into educative ones.
You are very direct about parents and community responsibility.
Yes, I am. Schools cannot do this alone, and were never meant to. Families and communities must provide cultural context, rights, and meaning. Identity is too sacred to outsource. The education of our children has been, is, and forever will be our responsibility. Regardless of what system as a parent you choose to use, public or private, you are the primary educator of your child and the essential facilitator of authentic culture.
So rites of passage become the organizing framework for everything else.
Exactly. They align expectations, relationships, and responsibility across generations and across situations. Rights create cognitive shield that can protect an individual in hostile environments. Rites can also help build cognitive schemes that allow authentic engagement with others and new information.
What about scholars and researchers?
We need more research and attention on the process, not just outcomes. Rites of passage integrate variables that scholars keep studying in isolation, identity, family, community, culture, socioeconomic status, and purpose. The truth is, it is rarely that a single variable makes a difference exclusively. It is at the intersections of multiple variables and the relationships between those variables when they occur in what context that is to say the process. Not only should we study humans' activity in the context of process, we should in particular understand the human experience in a process that is universal to the human experience, the rites of passage. And while the process of rites is universal, its power to transform and promote growth only makes sense in its cultural context. Being able to understand human activity within its own cultural context allows for an analysis of strength. It also allows for researchers to see and recognize subtlety that otherwise may be blind to an observer, unfamiliar with the cultural context.
Wow. There's so much to unpack right there. Given all of the recent challenges to education, how do we move forward?
Yeah, that's the real question. I hope I'm not out of line here. I know you made time to be with us for this episode, and not to put you on the spot, can you come back for the next episode? It's the final episode of the series and the last of season 1.
Oh, okay. Not to put me on the spot, but putting me on the spot. I'm pretty sure I can make the time, but I need to stay in my lane as well. Ms. Brown is my publicist, and if she puts it on my schedule, then it's on my schedule.
Well, Dr. Goggins, consider yourself scheduled. In our final episode, we bring everything together. We'll explore where this work goes next and what it means to sustain African-centered rites of passage in the face of resistance. We'll talk about responsibility. Who must carry this work forward? And since this will be our final episode of the series and the conclusion of this first season, we will spend some time discussing future projects and what to expect next from Rooted Dialogues.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Doc, and thank you to our listeners. Don't forget to share this episode with educators, parents, and community builders who are about the business of creating meaningful, authentic learning experiences. In the meantime, stay rooted, stay connected, and keep rising.
If you're new to Rooted Dialogues, I encourage you to subscribe and listen back through the series. Conversations like the ones we have had are often catalysts for real change and growth. This is Rooted Dialogues, where community, culture, and critical thought converge. This podcast is a production of St. Rest Publications. Until the next episode, peace. Welcome to Rooted Dialogues, a St. Rest Publications podcast where community, culture, and critical thought converge. I'm your host, Victoria Brown.
And I'm LaVon Gordon. Thank you for joining us.
This is a special episode. This is episode 9, the final episode of our series on African-centered rites of passage in education, and the final episode of season 1 of Rooted Dialogues.
So today we're going to do 3 things. First, we'll recap the journey we've taken together. Second, we'll extend the conversation on implications, especially where African-centered rites of passage intersect with education today. And third, we'll share a bit about what's next, upcoming projects, and what you can expect in season 2.
And if you're new to Rooted Dialogues, this is a great moment to subscribe and go back to episodes 3 through 8. This series was designed as a journey, not standalone conversations.
Let's briefly ground ourselves in the arc of the series. Episode 3 introduced African centered rites of passage in education and framed rites of passage as a universal process of human development, not a cultural add on. Episode 4 focused on the rites of passage process itself: preparation, separation, transition, and reincorporation, and why transformation requires community accountability. Episode 5 explored sense of self, distinguishing self esteem from self consciousness and naming how academic success can become harmful when it requires cultural erasure.
In episode 6, we confronted history, how American schooling developed alongside slavery, segregation, and white supremacy, and how curriculum control and teacher preparation continue to reflect those origins.
And in episode 7, we asked the hard question: so what? What are the implications for educators, students, parents, communities, and scholars if rites of passage are absent or reclaimed?
Then in episode 8 with Dr. Goggins, we reflected on 25 plus years since the book's first publication in 1996, examining SEL, trauma-informed practices, restorative practices, PBIS, and the danger of these frameworks when race, power, and intention are ignored. Before we go any further, we want to pause and ground this final episode in a nugget of wisdom. This one is deeply personal. Dr. Goggins, this one is yours to read.
Thank you. This nugget comes from my grandfather, Douglas Goggins Sr. He was an old-fashioned holy roller pastor in the Church of God. And he used to say, "It may take faith the size of a mustard seed to move a mountain, but you better bring your shovel."
That's a whole philosophy right there.
Absolutely, faith and responsibility, vision and labor.
Exactly. It's not enough to believe transformation is possible. You have to be willing to do the work. Rites of passage demand both spiritual grounding and practical action.
Dr. Goggins, let's start here. Why is African-centered rites of passage in education still relevant today?
It's still relevant because the core issues that inspired the book are still with us. One of the biggest is what I call the social contract with educators, the fundamental question of what education is for. When education is done well, its purpose is human development. Math, reading, writing, those are tools. They are not the goal.
So instruction isn't the same as education.
Exactly. And the rites of passage process gives us a rubric to evaluate education. To what extent do the experiences in schools move students toward adult development, toward responsibility, identity, and purpose? When you remove the arts, remove extracurriculars, narrow learning to test prep, you diminish the quality of education. James Comer said it clearly: child development is academics. You cannot separate the two.
And when we apply that rubric specifically to Black students,
It forces us to ask, for what purpose are Black children being educated? Historically, even when education was provided to enslaved Africans, it was to make them better slaves. Today, the focus on quality instruction often ignores the intention of instruction. If a teacher believes a student is inferior, even the best instruction will teach that student how to be a high-functioning inferior person. That's why the achievement gap persists. It reflects intention, not just skill.
This connects directly to SEL, social emotional learning, and PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports.
Yes, when Dr. Dina Simmons warns that SEL can become white supremacy with a hug, she's naming intention. Are we teaching self-awareness and self-management so students can live authentically, think critically, and challenge injustice? Or so they can be better adjusted to oppression? With PBIS, are we reinforcing growth and reflection, or are we prioritizing teacher comfort? Without cultural responsiveness and equity, these frameworks can deepen harm.
That brings us to teacher preparation.
About 80% of teachers are white, while student populations are increasingly diverse. And if I remember correctly, Doc, you did the research. Most teachers receive minimal training in cultural competence. How does rites of passage help bridge that divide?
Yes, the rites of passage model centers the universal process of human development. As Asa Hilliard said, we know what to do. First, treat them like human beings. Second, love them. That would be revolutionary if generally practiced. Rites of passage make humanity the foundation of pedagogy.
And it challenges structures that normalize dehumanization.
Yes, by making it conscious and by reconnecting families and communities as primary educational partners. It forces us to ask, who is leading education and toward what end?
That's powerful. This work isn't about reforming systems from the inside, only it's about reclaiming responsibility.
And that brings us full circle. Rites of passage aren't programs, they're commitments.
Exactly. Faith with a shovel, vision with labor.
As we close this chapter, we want to acknowledge something important. What began as an experiment, this first season of Rooted Dialogues, has proven to be deeply valuable. We are genuinely grateful for the growing community of subscribers and listeners who have taken this journey with us, reflected with us, and stayed engaged in the dialogue.
And because this chapter is closing, we want to be clear this is not an ending, it's a pause. We're going to take a short break. That pause gives us space, not only to thoughtfully plan season 2, but also to complete other meaningful projects that deserve focused attention.
Dr. Goggins, before we step away, we want to ask, what are some of the projects you'll be working on during this break?
Amongst the continued advocacy work I do, I'm currently working on 2 writing projects, and I'm really looking forward to getting both manuscripts completed. One of them is a collaborative project with a few of my former schoolmates and colleagues. We all graduated from the same high school, and each of us has earned a doctorate in education. But we've each taken different paths and navigated unique challenges along the way. We're using our school as a microcosm to examine the broader realities of American urban education, what worked, what didn't, and what those experiences reveal about systemic issues that continue to shape schooling today.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. For me, this pause is an opportunity to spend some intentional time with my novel to get back into that creative space and push the work forward.
I'll be taking some time to rest as well, and then shifting my focus to my publicist responsibilities with St. Rest Publications and supporting Dr. Goggins' marketing and getting the word out about his upcoming projects. And finalize some of your 2026 calendar.
For our subscribers, season 2 is currently planned for a March return, so stay tuned.
Dr. Goggins, can you share a little about what listeners can expect in season 2?
Absolutely. Season 2 will focus on bringing the light into a new day African-centered rites of passage, the 25th anniversary edition. The book was first published in 1998, and it takes a much deeper dive into the rites of passage model, its purpose and function, its structure and process, and the transformative power of rites of passage when implemented with integrity. Before we close, I also want to say thank you to both of you, Victoria and LaVon, for doing such an outstanding job hosting Rooted Dialogues. You've carried this work with care, clarity, and purpose. I'm truly excited about what's coming in season 2. I also want listeners to know that Afrocentric Info LLC, the parent company, will be launching or relaunching the Afro Soul Network, and through applied academic solutions, we're developing professional learning opportunities focused on human-centered teaching. I encourage everyone to visit www.afrocentric.info to follow the updates.
Wow, Doc, that's a lot. 2026 will be a great year. I'm looking forward to it. As we close season 1, remember, stay rooted, stay connected, and stay pressing forward.
Thank you for allowing us to share space with you and to be in dialogue together. This has been Rooted Dialogues, where community, culture, and critical thought converge, a production of St. Rest Publications. Until the next episode, peace.